Once upon a time, a mayor's job kept them pretty close to home, but all that seems to be changing.
Now local mayors and even city council members are taking up global causes, and that can have them traveling around the world. Tom Lydon of the Fox 9 Investigators has been taking a closer look at these frequent flyers. And what has changed, Tom?
You know what I think's really changed is politics has changed, especially in Washington, and the gridlock and the inability to simply get anything done. You know, President Obama said it himself in the State of the Union address, mayors do get things done. And now it seems every mayor wants their city to have the next big idea, and also to show that they can personally run with the big dogs. There is an old saying that all politics is local, but now it seems the safest politics is global, and the show is best when taken on the road. If you're looking to track down a city politician these days, you can still find them in their natural habitat at City Hall. But you'll also run into them here at the airport, where we caught up with Minneapolis Mayor Hodges and St. Paul Mayor Chris Coleman, arriving back from D.C. a few weeks ago, barely escaping that East Coast blizzard.
Being in planes is about the least pleasant thing.
At 6'3", Coleman is no fan of flying, and yet, as the Fox 9 investigators discovered, the skies are pretty friendly for local politicians. Coleman's travels took him to Paris in December for the 21st Annual United Nations Summit on Climate Change.
And you think there will be a payoff in tangible terms for people of St. Paul from that?
Well, there's no question. I have made climate change one of my absolute top priorities.
Coleman says a mayor is like a CEO, and that climate change is important, especially to Mississippi River cities like St. Paul, that often get left out of the conversation.
But you didn't have to go to Paris to learn about that. And I guess when I get a little concerned is when I hear people talk about raise awareness. I'm kind of like, how do you raise awareness going to...
It's not about raising awareness. It was about working to make sure that that was part of the conversation that was happening on a very global scale.
Mayor Coleman has gone on 46 out-of-state trips in nearly 3 years, costing the city only $10,000. That's because 33 of those trips were paid for by the National League of Cities, including a trip to Morocco. Coleman was president of the group in 2014. Coleman also went with a delegation to Germany, Sweden, and Denmark to develop a vision for what can be done with the old Ford plant site.
When I go on the road and I build the relationship is stronger and we bring the resources home.
Mayor Hodges is putting the miles in as well. In just 2 years in office, Hodges has gone on 30 out-of-state trips for a total of 65 days on the road. Taxpayers paying directly for 2/3 of that travel, $35,000. Mayor Hodges has toured our sister city in Harbin, China, with Councilmember John Quincy to discuss cold zone tourism. Traveled to the Aspen Institute in Colorado for a fellowship with rising political stars, where they studied the underlying values and principles of Western democracy. And she's gone to Rome and Vatican City, one of 60 mayors from across the world, to spend a little time with the Pope on his dime at a conference on climate change and human trafficking.
Tell me why that wasn't a photo op.
Climate change does have an impact on low-income people in particular, which makes them more vulnerable for sex trafficking.
Did you say climate change has an impact on human trafficking?
The Pope makes this case. Because of weather events, it leads to more migration.
But not all of Mayor Hodges' trips are so glamorous. Her calendar's heavy on conferences and conventions, dealing with everything from poverty and racial equity to gun violence and terrorism. Even council members are getting the travel bug. Minneapolis City Council member Alondra Cano not only went to France for that UN climate change conference, Quel Surprise, she also went to Barcelona, Spain, for a conference on farmers markets. She visited our sister city in Mexico and 2 conferences in D.C. for a travel tab of nearly 10 grand.
I think it's really important to have informed, engaged, and active council members instead of council members who just kind of stick into their own little box and stick their neck in the sand. So I think that being really engaged and active on these different levels puts Minneapolis as a leader.
Fellow Councilman John Quincy hasn't left the country, but he's made 8 trips around the U.S. to study airport noise, including Palm Springs in February, for a total of 17,000. The city is even sending staff out on research expeditions. Policy aide Robin Garwood went to the International Winter Cycling Congress in Winnipeg for 800, and he followed a delegation to Cuba to study composting and gardening for 1900, bringing back such revolutionary ideas as compostable toilets.
Mayors and council members don't want to be mayors and council members.
Government affairs expert David Schultz believes something else is going on with these frequent flyers, that these trips are a way for politicians to build up their resume for higher office, to show they're players in the big leagues. But he says it's far from a mayor's typical job description, focusing on core services, putting out fires, catching the bad guys, and making sure the streets are plowed.
And increasingly, local public officials like to talk about every issue except those. They want to sort of talk about climate change, or they want to talk about global matters. And yes, we may be an interconnected world, but still the primary things that governments do are those basic day-to-day quality of life services. So you got to show, I think, for public benefit, how it comes back and affects those basic services.
Mayor Hodges, who's gone on 7 trips to D.C., told us it's more than a photo op. It's about bringing home the bacon.
2 years in the job, 2 months on the road. Too much?
When you look at the fact that I brought home well over $6.5 million for the city, as well as the national initiative, as well as the Tech Hire program, Climate Action Champs, it's been time worth spending.
But nailing down that money is complicated.
And I'm just trying to figure out where the money is in the pipeline.
Hodges takes credit for federal grants in which the application began under former Mayor Ryback. And while City Hall insiders give her credit for landing a Bloomberg Innovation Grant after courting former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, that money is to study how equally the city's resources are distributed, not to actually increase those resources.
The mayor makes it sound like all these federal programs equal money in the bank, but nothing could be further from the truth. What the city is really getting is preferred status for these federal grants, and often it's not direct aid, but it's research or studies. And historically, this kind of federal money tends to just vaporize into the bureaucracy. It is one thing to be a rainmaker, something else if your constituents are only getting drops.
I would like to see evidence that the mayor's travels have resulted in resources for the north side of Minneapolis.
Nakima Levy-Pounds became one of the mayor's sharpest critics during the Black Lives Matter occupation of the 4th Precinct, where Hodges made enemies on both sides. Hodges has also lost support among unions and the business community after her embarrassing backtracking on the working families agenda. And council members talk privately about a lack of leadership from the mayor's office, her isolation, and having to move meetings to accommodate her busy travel schedule.
I would argue that trust is at an all-time low, and the mayor's going to have to do some heavy lifting.
And she argues you can't do heavy lifting if you're not around. Both mayors told us spending time promoting their cities, getting face time with decision makers, is just part of a mayor's job in the 21st century. The question is, at what cost? In time, in money, and priorities.
If the CEO has businesses around the country, they travel. So that's part of what mayors do.
You just say, well, I got to be a member just to be a player. That's probably not enough of an answer.
Professor Schultz points out there are alternatives to travel, like teleconferencing, that would actually allow more people to participate and to share ideas. The irony is, for all the talk of climate change, air travel is one of the worst offenders. Mayor Hodges traveled nearly 70,000 miles, enough to circle the globe almost 3 times. By our estimate, she personally contributing 10 tons of CO2. That is not a light carbon footprint. You can also find details on all the travel and who picked up the tab at fox9.com. For the Fox 9 investigators, I'm Tom Lydon.